During a fierce storm, a millionaire rescues a homeless black girl and her baby. But when he notices her birthmark, a shocking realization dawns. What hidden connection will this mark reveal, and how will it change their lives forever? And if you cherish your family and love videos like this, subscribe to our channel to have 10 years of luck in your life. The evening rain pounded against the windows of Lucas Bennett's Mercedes S-Class, transforming the suburban streets into shimmering rivers. Lucas adjusted his grip on the leather steering wheel, his knuckles whitening as another crack of thunder shook the air. The weather service hadn't predicted a storm of this magnitude, and the usually well-lit streets had become treacherous in the darkness. The windshield wipers worked frantically as Lucas approached the intersection near Maple Drive. His headlights cut through the deluge, illuminating two figures huddled beneath a dilapidated store marquees. A woman held a small child protectively against her chest, their meager belongings contained in a weathered backpack at their feet. Lucas typically drove past such sights without a second glance. Homelessness was all too common in the business district, but something about this scene made him ease off the accelerator. The woman wasn't begging or holding a sign. She simply struggled to shield her child from the elements. Lucas's finger hovered over the window control as his mind raced through scenarios. The cautious businessman in him advised against stopping. It could be dangerous, or worse, a setup. But the child couldn't have been more than 5 years old, and the storm showed no signs of relenting. After a moment's deliberation, Lucas pulled his car to the curb, the wipers still fighting against the torrential rain. The woman regarded his vehicle with obvious suspicion as he lowered the passenger window. "There's a shelter 3 miles from here," he called out over another rumble of thunder. "I can give you a ride if you'd like." He deliberately kept his hands visible on the steering wheel, aware of how threatening he might appear despite his expensive suit and luxury vehicle. The woman hesitated, drawing her daughter closer. Another violent crack of thunder made the decision for her. She quickly gathered their belongings and hurried to the car, helping her daughter into the back seat before sliding in beside her. The interior light revealed their condition more clearly. Their clothes were worn but clean, and the child's hair had been carefully braided despite their circumstances. As the woman adjusted her position, her shirt shifted slightly, revealing a distinctive birthmark on her upper back, a pattern that resembled a perfect star. Lucas caught sight of it in the rearview mirror, and something about its shape triggered a distant memory he couldn't quite grasp. "I'm Lucas," he offered, pulling away from the curb. "The shelter on Oak Street is decent. I've done some work with them." "I'm Jasmine," the woman replied softly.
This is so.
The little girl offered a timid wave from behind her mother's arm. "We've been to that shelter before, but it's usually full by this time." Lucas found himself saying something unexpected. "I have plenty of room at my house. You could stay in the guest wing until the storm passes." The words surprised him as much as they seemed to surprise Jasmine. In his 15 years as CEO, he had rarely invited anyone to his home, let alone strangers. The drive to his mansion was mostly silent, punctuated only by Zoe's occasional whispered comments about the size of the houses they passed. Lucas used this time to reflect on his own childhood in similar surroundings. Despite the material comfort, he remembered the emotional distance, parents perpetually occupied with social obligations, achievements measured in dollar signs rather than happiness, and dinner conversations dominated by stock prices and business strategies. As they pulled into his circular driveway, Lucas noticed Jasmine's sharp intake of breath at the sight of his home. The 3-story Georgian mansion stood imposing against the stormy sky, its windows casting warm light against the darkness. For the first time, Lucas saw his home through outside eyes, the manicured lawns, the fountain, currently still due to the storm, the sheer excess of space for a single occupant. Inside, his housekeeper Maria appeared immediately, her eyes widening at the sight of their drenched guests. Lucas instructed her to prepare the guest rooms in the East Wing and bring some dry clothes. As Jasmine and Zoe followed Maria upstairs, Lucas remained in his study, contemplating the strange turn his evening had taken. The star-shaped birthmark continued to nag at his memory, connecting to something from his past that remained frustratingly out of reach. Studying the family photos on his desk, formal, staged affairs that spoke more of obligation than affection. Lucas realized how long it had been since genuine need, rather than social expectations, had crossed his threshold. The sound of Zoe's delighted laughter echoing from upstairs created an unfamiliar warmth in his chest, and for the first time in years, his massive house felt less empty. The morning light filtered through the east wing windows as Jasmine sat at the breakfast table, watching Zoe devour a stack of pancakes Maria had prepared. Lucas noticed how Jasmine's shoulders remained tense despite the comfortable surroundings, her eyes constantly darting between her daughter and the door as if expecting to be asked to leave at any moment. "You don't have to rush," Lucas said, pouring himself another cup of coffee. "Take time to think about your next steps." He observed how carefully Jasmine handled the fine china, her movements suggesting she'd known better circumstances in the past. The star-shaped birthmark peeked out from beneath her borrowed blouse, still tugging at his memory. "I grew up in St. Mary's orphanage," Jasmine said suddenly, her voice barely above a whisper. "I never knew where I belonged, not really." She traced the rim of her teacup with her finger, lost in thought. "The nuns were kind, but there were so many of us. Sister Margaret used to tell me I was special because of my birthmark, that it meant I came from somewhere important. But after 18 years, I aged out of the system with nowhere to go." Lucas leaned forward, his business mind already calculating possibilities. "Have you ever tried to trace your family?" The question made Jasmine's hands tremble slightly as she reached for the sugar bowl. "The records were destroyed in a fire before I arrived at St. Mary's. All I have is this birthmark and stories Sister Margaret used to tell about my mother dropping me off, saying something about protecting a legacy." Jasmine's eyes drifted to Zoe, who was now drawing with crayons Maria had found. "I've tried to give Zoe more stability than I had, but..." Lucas reached for his phone, scrolling through his contacts. "I know people who could help you find work. Get back on your feet." He started typing a message, but paused when he saw Jasmine's expression darken. "I've tried that route before," she said. "The moment they learn I have no fixed address, no references." She straightened her spine, pride evident in her posture despite her circumstances.
"I'm qualified.
I completed my GED at the orphanage, even took some community college classes before Zoe came along. But doors keep closing." The sound of children's laughter interrupted their conversation. Lucas's twins, Emma and Ethan, had discovered Zoe in the breakfast room. Within minutes, they were showing her their toy collection, their excited voices echoing through the typically quiet house. Later that afternoon, Lucas made several calls from his home office. The responses from his social circle were immediate and overwhelmingly negative. "Are you out of your mind, Bennett?" His friend Richard Harrison, CEO of a prominent bank, demanded. "You can't just invite homeless people into your home. What about your reputation? The company's image?" Similar reactions came from other members of his social circle. Margaret Whitman, his board member and longtime family friend, was particularly vocal. "Lucas, darling, I understand wanting to help, but there are proper channels. Write a check to a shelter. Serve on a committee. This personal involvement, it's not appropriate for someone in your position." Lucas ended each call feeling increasingly frustrated. He watched through his office window as Zoe played with the twins in the garden, their laughter carrying across the manicured lawn. The sight of Jasmine helping Emma pick flowers, showing a natural grace that belied her current circumstances, made him question the values of his social circle for the first time in years. That evening, during dinner, Lucas observed the natural way Jasmine helped both Zoe and his twins with their table manners, gently correcting without scolding. Her knowledge of proper etiquette confirmed his suspicions about her past. She hadn't always lived on the streets. "I want to help you find work," Lucas said after the children had been put to bed. "Real work, something that matches your skills." He noticed how Jasmine's eyes lit up before doubt crept back in. "My influence can open doors, but you'll have to prove yourself once you're through them." "Why would you do this?" Jasmine asked, her voice carrying years of learned suspicion. "What do you want in return?" Lucas considered her question carefully. The truth was, he wasn't entirely sure himself. The star birthmark, her mysterious background, the way she carried herself, Everything suggested a story that resonated with something deep in his own past, something he couldn't quite grasp yet. "Let's just say I'm curious," he replied, aware of how insufficient the answer must sound. "And maybe I'm tired of measuring everything in life through the lens of business transactions." As they sat in his study, the storm outside having finally subsided, Lucas realized he was starting down a path that would challenge everything he'd built. His phone buzzed with more messages from concerned friends and business associates, each one warning him about the risks of helping Jasmine and Zoe. But watching Jasmine examine the books in his library with genuine interest, he knew he couldn't simply return to his carefully ordered life and forget about them. St. Mary's Orphanage stood as a weathered brick building on the outskirts of town, its facade showing years of minimal maintenance. Lucas parked his car in the nearly empty lot, noting how the building's imposing structure contrasted with the cheerful children's drawings displayed in the windows. He'd called ahead, mentioning his name and foundation work, which had secured him a meeting with Sister Agnes, one of the longest-serving staff members. The elderly nun met him in a small office cluttered with filing cabinets and children's artwork. "Mr. Bennett," she said, gesturing to a worn chair. "We don't often get visitors asking about former residents, especially ones from so long ago." She pulled out a thick folder, its edges frayed with age. "Most of our records from that period were lost in the fire, but I kept my own notes about the children under my care." Lucas leaned forward as Sister Agnes opened the folder. "What can you tell me about Jasmine's arrival?" he asked, watching the nun's face carefully for any reaction. Sister Agnes's hands paused briefly over the papers, a flicker of recognition crossing her features.
"Ah, Jasmine.
The girl with the star," she said softly. "I remember that night clearly, though I wasn't supposed to be on duty. A woman came during a storm much like the one we had recently. She was well-dressed, elegant even, but terrified of something. She handed over the baby, already named Jasmine, and insisted we document the birthmark. Sister Ag." Ness pulled out a yellowed photograph showing an infant with the distinctive star-shaped mark. She said it was important for the child's future, that it would help identify her true family when the time was right. The mention of the storm and the mysterious woman's fear stirred something in Lucas's memory. He recalled his grandmother, Eleanor Bennett, telling him stories on stormy nights about family secrets and lost connections. "Did the woman leave any other information?" he pressed. Sister Agnes hesitated, glancing at the door before lowering her voice. "She left a letter, to be given to Jasmine on her 18th birthday. But when the fire happened, we thought it was lost. Years later, I found it hidden in an old book, but by then, Jasmine had already left the orphanage." She reached into her desk drawer and withdrew an envelope, aged but intact. "I've kept it safe, waiting for someone to come asking the right questions." Lucas stared at the envelope, his heart racing. "Why didn't you try to find her?" The question came out more accusatory than he intended, but Sister Agnes didn't seem offended.
"We did, Mr. Bennett.
But life for children who age out of the system isn't easy. They move frequently, change names sometimes. Jasmine was especially difficult to track after she had Zoe." She handed him the envelope. "Perhaps you're the one meant to deliver this." On the drive back to his mansion, Lucas's mind whirled with possibilities. The timing of the woman's arrival at the orphanage coincided with a period of significant upheaval in his own family history, the years following his grandmother's mysterious estrangement from certain family members. He arrived home to find the house filled with the sounds of preparation for Zoe's birthday party. His twins had insisted on celebrating their new friend, and Jasmine had reluctantly agreed. Lucas tucked the envelope into his study drawer, deciding to wait for the right moment to share his discoveries. In the kitchen, Jasmine was helping Maria bake cupcakes, her movements confident and precise. Zoe sat at the counter, decorating cookies with more enthusiasm than skill, while the twins offered creative suggestions for toppings. The scene struck Lucas as both foreign and familiar, like a memory he'd never actually experienced. "You seem distracted," Jasmine observed later that evening, after the children had gone to bed. They sat in the garden, the night air heavy with the scent of blooming jasmine flowers, and coincidence that didn't feel like coincidence anymore. Lucas considered telling her about the letter, but held back. "I'm thinking about family," he said instead. "About how we define it, and how sometimes the connections we think we understand turn out to be more complicated than we imagined." He watched as Jasmine absently touched the area where her birthmark lay beneath her clothes. "Sister Margaret used to say something similar," she replied. "She told me that family isn't always about blood. It's about belonging. But she also used to look at my birthmark with this strange expression, like she knew something she couldn't say." Jasmine turned to face him directly. "Did you find something at the orphanage?" The weight of the letter in his study seemed to press on Lucas's conscience. But revealing its existence now, without understanding its contents or implications, felt premature. "I found reasons to keep looking," he answered carefully. Sometimes answers lead to more questions before they lead to truth. The upcoming birthday party loomed as both a celebration and a milestone. Lucas knew that his social circle would be watching, judging, making assumptions about his relationship with Jasmine and Zoe. But sitting there in the garden, watching Jasmine's profile in the moonlight, he realized he was past caring about their opinions. The mystery of her past, and its possible connection to his own, had become more important than maintaining his carefully constructed social facade. The day of Zoe's birthday party arrived with perfect weather, the previous week's storms replaced by gentle sunshine. Lucas's mansion had been transformed with decorations that his twins had helped choose, colorful balloons, streamers, and a princess theme that made Zoe's eyes shine with delight. The contrast between the elegant home and the whimsical decorations created a visual representation of the worlds colliding within its walls. The first guests began arriving at 2 o'clock. Lucas noticed immediately how his social circle divided itself: parents who allowed their children to play with Zoe, and those who subtly steered their offspring toward other activities. Jasmine stood near the refreshment table, wearing a borrowed dress that fit her perfectly, yet somehow made her look more out of place. She maintained her dignity despite the sideways glances and whispered conversations that followed her movements. Victoria Ashworth, a prominent board member's wife, cornered Lucas near the gift table. "Darling, you've always been known for your charitable impulses," she said, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "But bringing these people into your home, involving them with the children? People are talking, Lucas. They're saying you've lost your business sense." Before Lucas could respond, he caught sight of Jasmine helping a young girl who had spilled her drink. The natural grace with which she handled the situation, soothing the child, cleaning the mess, preventing any embarrassment, spoke of an upbringing at odds with her current circumstances. Several guests noticed, too, their expressions shifting from dismissal to confusion. Richard Harrison approached next, abandoning his usual business diplomacy. "Bennett, this has gone far enough. That woman is living in your house, for God's sake. Do you have any idea what this looks like? The board is concerned about your judgment. There are rumors about your relationship with her." "My relationship with Jasmine is my business," Lucas replied firmly, surprising himself with the protective edge in his voice. "And my judgment? Maybe it's clearer than it's been in years." He watched as Zoe blew out her candles, her face glowing with happiness, while his twins cheered beside her. The scene filled him with a certainty that transcended his concerns about social standing. The party's tension reached its peak during the gift-opening ceremony. Zoe sat surrounded by presents that reflected the stark divide in the room: extravagant gifts from guests who treated the occasion as a social obligation, and thoughtful, modest offerings from those who had actually taken time to know the little girl. Jasmine stood slightly apart, her discomfort visible only to those paying close attention. Margaret Whitman's voice carried across the garden, deliberately loud enough to be heard. "It's like watching a charity case unfold in real time. Next thing you know, he'll be adopting them." The comment drew nervous laughter from some guests, while others shifted uncomfortably. Lucas saw the moment Jasmine's composure cracked. She maintained her dignity, but began gathering Zoe's things with trembling hands. The little girl, still wrapped up in the excitement of her first real birthday party, didn't notice her mother's distress. Following them as they moved toward the house, Lucas caught up with Jasmine in the quiet of his study. "You don't have to leave," he said, closing the door on the party sounds. "Those people, Their opinions don't matter. Don't they? Jasmine's voice carried years of learned wisdom about social hierarchies. Lucas, I've seen how this works. Your kindness is admirable, but I won't be the reason your life falls apart. I can't be responsible for damaging everything you've built. What I've built, Lucas responded, the words tasting bitter in his mouth, is a life so focused on appearances that I forgot what matters. Those people out there, they're not my friends. They're business connections, social obligations. This past week, watching you with Zoe with my children, it's shown me what I've been missing. Zoe's voice echoed from the garden, laughing at something the twins had said. The sound seemed to physically pain Jasmine, who pressed her hands against Lucas's desk. We can't stay here forever. This isn't our world. Maybe it is, Lucas found himself saying. Maybe that's what all of this has been about. The birthmark, the timing, the connections I'm discovering. He stopped himself, aware that he still hadn't told her about the letter from the orphanage. A commotion from the garden interrupted them. Raised voices, the sound of breaking glass. Through the study window, they could see Richard Harrison gesturing angrily while other guests quickly gathered their children. The perfect birthday party was dissolving into exactly the kind of scene the socialites would gossip about for months. Jasmine squared her shoulders, a familiar determination settling over her features. I appreciate everything you've done, she said softly. But I won't let Zoe grow up watching her mother being treated like a charity case. We've managed before. We'll manage again. As she turned to leave the study, Lucas realized he was standing at a crossroads. The comfortable, predictable life he'd built was crumbling, but in its place, something more genuine was trying to take root. The weight of the orphanage letter in his desk drawer seemed to grow heavier with each passing moment. Lucas spent hours in his private study after the disastrous birthday party, surrounded by old family photographs and documents. His grandmother Eleanor's words echoed in his memory as he examined a particular photo from 1965. The elegant woman in the picture stood beside a tall, distinguished-looking black man, their body language suggesting intimacy rather than the formal pose typical of that era. The research had started with a DNA testing kit he'd found in Eleanor's belongings after her death. He'd never submitted it, assuming it was just another of her eccentricities. Now, staring at the photograph, he understood why she'd wanted him to know the truth. The man in the photo bore a striking resemblance to his grandfather, not Thomas Bennett, the man who'd raised his father, but someone whose existence had been carefully erased from family records. His hands trembled as he opened his laptop, accessing sealed family documents that hadn't been viewed in decades. A marriage certificate from 1964 appeared on the screen, Eleanor Bennett and James Washington. The marriage had been annulled 6 months later, but not before Eleanor had become pregnant. Lucas's father, Richard Bennett, had been born in 1965, the same year Thomas Bennett had suddenly married Eleanor and given the baby his name. Further digging revealed more connections. James Washington's family had a distinctive genetic trait, a star-shaped birthmark that appeared in every generation, the same mark that now rested on Jasmine's back. Lucas found himself staring at a family tree that showed James Washington had a sister, whose granddaughter had disappeared during a custody battle in the late 1990s, around the same time Jasmine had been left at St. Mary's Orphanage. The weight of this discovery pressed against his chest as he made his way to the garden, where Jasmine sat watching Zoe play with the twins. The children had refused to be separated after the party, their bond growing stronger despite the adults' prejudices. "Can we talk?" he asked, his voice rougher than usual. Inside his study, Lucas shared what he'd found, watching Jasmine's face as she absorbed each piece of information. The marriage certificate, the photographs, the family tree, each document added another layer to their shared history. When he finally showed her the letter from the orphanage, her hands shook so badly she could barely open it. The letter, written in elegant handwriting, confirmed everything. Jasmine's mother had been trying to protect her from a family lawsuit that threatened to use the child as leverage in a dispute over the Washington family fortune. The star birthmark was meant to be proof of her lineage when the time was right to reclaim her inheritance. "So we're related?" Jasmine asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The magnitude of this revelation hung between them, reshaping their understanding of the past weeks. Distant cousins, Lucas confirmed. Our grandfathers were brothers-in-law, briefly. The family split happened before either of us was born, but the consequences. He gestured to encompass their current situation, the stark difference in their lives despite their shared blood. Jasmine stood abruptly, pacing the study.
This is too much, she said.
A few weeks ago, I was just trying to keep Zoe fed and dry. Now you're telling me we're part of some hidden family drama? That I might have some claim to what? Money? Position? The very things that made those people at the party look at us like we were dirt. Lucas understood her skepticism. The weight of privilege and prejudice that had shaped both their lives couldn't be erased by documents and DNA. This doesn't have to change anything you don't want it to change, he said carefully. But it does explain something I've felt since that first night, a connection I couldn't quite understand. The sound of children's laughter drifted through the window. Zoe and the twins had created their own little world, unbound by the social constraints that complicated adult relationships. Those children, Lucas continued, they see each other clearly, without the barriers we've built. Maybe we could learn from them. Jasmine touched her birthmark unconsciously, tears gathering in her eyes. My mother used to say I came from somewhere important, she whispered. I always thought she was just trying to give me hope. But she knew. She was trying to protect me until I could protect myself. The Monday following their discovery, Lucas arrived at his office to find his executive assistant, Sarah, waiting with an unusually thick stack of messages. The board has called an emergency meeting, she informed him, her expression concerned. And Mr. Davidson from PR needs to speak with you immediately about the current situation. The carefully neutral way she said those last words revealed how quickly news had spread through corporate channels. In his corner office, Lucas reviewed the mounting evidence of professional consequences. Stock prices had dipped slightly following rumors about his erratic behavior. Several major clients had requested meetings to discuss their ongoing relationships. His inbox contained thinly veiled threats from board members about votes of no confidence. James Davidson, the head of public relations, entered without knocking. We need to get ahead of this, he announced, placing a prepared statement on Lucas's desk. A brief announcement about your charitable work with the homeless, perhaps a photo op at a shelter opening. We spin this as corporate social responsibility and move on. He paused, noticing Lucas's expression. Unless there's more to the story? Meanwhile, Jasmine faced her own challenges. Despite her newly discovered heritage, she had insisted on pursuing employment independently. Lucas had arranged an interview at a prestigious marketing firm, careful not to reveal their connection. She sat in the lobby now, her borrowed suit pristine, her resume highlighting her community college credits and volunteer work at the orphanage. The interviewer, a middle-aged woman named Patricia Mills, reviewed Jasmine's application with growing skepticism. There's a significant gap in your employment history, she noted, and your current address. She paused, recognition flickering across her face. Isn't that Lucas Bennett's residence? Jasmine straightened her spine, channeling the dignity that had sustained her through years of hardship. Yes, Mr. Bennett has provided temporary accommodation while I secure employment. My qualifications and capabilities stand on their own merits. Back at his office, Lucas faced the board meeting he'd been dreading. 12 pairs of eyes watched him with varying degrees of concern and judgment as he entered the conference room. Richard Harrison spoke first, his voice carrying the weight of 40 years in corporate leadership. Lucas, we've known each other since you were a boy. Your father trusted me to mentor you, and I've watched you build this company into what it is today. But this recent behavior, taking in homeless strangers, neglecting important client relationships, and now rumors about some family connection? The board requires an explanation. Lucas stood at the head of the conference table, his grandmother's courage flowing through his veins. What I'm about to share will change how you see this situation, he began. He distributed copies of the carefully redacted family documents, watching as understanding dawned on their faces. The woman you've been gossiping about is my cousin, he stated firmly. Her displacement was the result of old family conflicts and hidden prejudices. Yes, This situation has personal implications, but it also presents an opportunity. Our company has always claimed to value family and social responsibility. Now we have a chance to prove it. The boardroom erupted in overlapping conversations. Some members appeared sympathetic, others concerned about shareholders' reactions. Margaret Whitman's voice cut through the chaos. Even if this connection is genuine, acknowledging it publicly could destabilize everything we've built. The market doesn't respond well to surprise family drama. While Lucas navigated corporate politics, Jasmine received a call from Patricia Mills. Despite her impressive interview, the position had been filled by a candidate with more recent experience. The rejection stung, but differently this time. She was no longer just fighting for survival. She was confronting generations of systemic barriers. That evening, Lucas found Jasmine in the garden, helping Zoe with homework while the twins practiced their reading nearby. The domestic scene contrasted sharply with the day's corporate drama. "How was your interview?" he asked, though her expression already answered the question. "They'll never see past their preconceptions," Jasmine replied, her voice tinged with resignation. Having a name, a history, even family connections, it doesn't erase years of being seen as less than. Lucas sat beside her, watching the children interact with the unconscious equality of youth. The board meeting went about as well as expected, he shared. But something interesting happened. When I showed them the documentation, when they had to confront the reality that privilege and prejudice had shaped our family's story, some of them actually listened. The rain returned to the city, bringing with it a sense of déjà vu as Lucas stood at his office window, watching droplets trace patterns on the glass. His phone buzzed constantly with messages from Andrew Parker, his former business partner and closest friend, who had recently begun investigating Jasmine's background with suspicious intensity. The timing of Andrew's sudden interest raised red flags in Lucas's mind. Inside his private bathroom, Lucas loosened his tie and splashed cold water on his face. The past few days had taken their toll. The board's ultimatum hung over him: either distance himself from the situation with Jasmine and Zoe or face a vote of no confidence. His company's stock had dropped another 3 points since the news of their family connection had leaked to certain shareholders. The evening found Lucas and Jasmine walking through the mansion's garden, seeking shelter from a light drizzle under the covered pathway. Their conversation, initially cautious, grew more intimate as they discussed the mounting pressures they bought.
Ashfa said.
Jasmine's voice carried a mixture of strength and vulnerability as she described her latest job rejection. "They said I wasn't a culture fit," she explained, running her fingers along the wet railing. The same words, different office. But this time, she turned to face Lucas, raindrops catching in her hair. "This time it hurts differently because I know what they're really saying. They can't handle someone who challenges their neat categories of who belongs where." Lucas moved closer, drawn by the fierce dignity in her expression. "I've been thinking about categories too," he admitted. "About how we let them define us, limit us. Today in the boardroom, I realized I've spent my entire career playing by rules I never questioned." Their eyes met, and the air between them shifted. The attraction that had been building over weeks, complicated by their family connection and social barriers, crystallized in that moment. Lucas reached out, brushing a raindrop from Jasmine's cheek. She didn't pull away. "This isn't simple," Jasmine whispered, even as she leaned slightly into his touch. "The world won't understand. Your board, your friends, your business." "I don't want simple," Lucas replied, his voice low and certain. "I want real." He closed the distance between them, their first kiss carrying the weight of shared history and future possibilities. The moment was interrupted by Lucas's phone vibrating aggressively in his pocket. Andrew Parker's name flashed on the screen, accompanied by a text message that made his blood run cold. "Found something interesting about your houseguest. Meet me tomorrow, or the board gets it first." Lucas pulled back, showing Jasmine the message. Her face hardened with recognition. "Andrew Parker, he was at the charity gala last year. He made some comments about the help when he thought I couldn't hear him." She straightened her shoulders, a gesture Lucas had come to associate with her preparing for battle. What could he have found? The answer arrived the next morning in Lucas's email, a detailed dossier on Jasmine's past, carefully curated to paint the worst possible picture. Andrew had dug up every hardship, every shelter stay, every desperate decision made to protect Zoe. But mixed with these true struggles were fabricated suggestions of fraud and manipulation, implications that Jasmine had researched the Bennett family connection before orchestrating their rainy night meeting. "You have until noon," Andrew's accompanying message read. "Step down voluntarily, cut ties with them, and this stays private. Fight me, and everyone learns how the great Lucas Bennett got played by a con artist." Lucas arrived at Andrew's office early the next morning, the dossier on Jasmine tucked under his arm. The prestigious law firm occupied the top floor of a downtown high-rise, its marble reception area designed to intimidate visitors. Andrew's secretary recognized Lucas immediately, her expression revealing that she'd been instructed to expect him. Andrew stood at his floor-to-ceiling window, maintaining what Lucas now recognized as a deliberately staged power pose. "Lucas, old friend," he said without turning. "I trust you've had time to review the materials I sent." The false concern in his voice carried years of practiced manipulation. Lucas placed the dossier on Andrew's desk, noting how his former friend had arranged various family photos to be visible, a calculated reminder of their shared history. 20 years of friendship, Andrew. 2 decades of building something together. And this is how you choose to end it. Andrew finally turned, his expression a masterwork of feigned sympathy. "I'm trying to save you from yourself, Lucas. This woman, this situation, it's destroying everything we built. The board is ready to remove you. Clients are getting nervous, and your family name is becoming a joke in the circles that matter." Meanwhile, at Lucas's mansion, Jasmine stood in her borrowed bedroom, folding the few clothes she and Zoe owned. The sounds of children playing drifted up from the garden, Zoe's laughter mingling with the twins' voices in a harmony that made her decision even more painful. Maria watched from the doorway, her usually stoic expression softened with concern. "You don't have to leave, Senora," Maria said softly. "El Senor Bennett, he fights for you." The housekeeper stepped into the room, placing a gentle hand on Jasmine's arm. "I see how he looks at you. This is different." Back in Andrew's office, the confrontation escalated. "Did you really think I wouldn't investigate?" Andrew demanded, pulling out additional documents. A homeless woman with a convenient birthmark, a tragic backstory, and suddenly she's claiming Bennett family connections? It was too perfect. Perfect. Lucas's laugh held no humor. "You want to know what's perfect, Andrew? The timing of your investigation. Right when the Washington Family Trust is up for review. Right when those old property rights are being reassessed." He watched realization flicker across Andrew's face. "You didn't expect me to know about that, did you?" Andrew recovered quickly, but his mask of concern slipped slightly. "The Washington properties are irrelevant. This is about protecting you, protecting the company." "No," Lucas countered. "This is about the land development deal you've been pursuing. The one that requires clear titles to those old Washington family properties. Properties that might have legitimate heirs." He stepped closer to his former friend. "You're not trying to protect me. You're trying to eliminate potential claimants before they discover their rights." At the mansion, Jasmine discovered the letter from the orphanage had fallen from her packing. Reading it again, she noticed details she'd missed before, references to property deeds, trust funds, and legal documents hidden away for safekeeping. Her hands trembled as she realized the full implications of her heritage. The confrontation in Andrew's office reached its climax. "Think carefully about your next move," Andrew warned. "Once I release this information, there's no going back. Your reputation, your position, everything your father built gone." Lucas reached into his briefcase and withdrew a different set of documents. "Interesting choice of words. Let's talk about what my father actually built and who helped him build it." He spread out ancient property deeds and letters that made Andrew's face pale. "My grandmother Eleanor kept excellent records, Andrew, including details about how certain properties were acquired from the Washington family under questionable circumstances." "You wouldn't dare expose this," Andrew hissed. "It would destroy both our families' legacies." Maybe some legacies need to be destroyed before they can be rebuilt honestly, Lucas replied, gathering his documents. You have until noon to decide, old friend. Withdraw your threats and support Jasmine's claim to her inheritance, or I release everything. The property theft, the forged documents, all of it. The mounting tension culminated during another rainstorm, mirroring the night when everything began. Lucas had arranged a meeting at the Grand Hotel's conference center, choosing neutral ground for what he knew would be a defining moment. Thunder rattled the windows as city's most influential figures arrived, drawn by an invitation they couldn't ignore. Jasmine stood before the mirror in her room, no longer feeling like a stranger in borrowed clothes. The dress she wore belonged to her now, a gift from Maria, who had insisted she look her best tonight. The star birthmark on her back seemed to burn with significance as she prepared to face the society that had once dismissed her. At the hotel, Lucas worked the room with practiced ease, though his mind raced with contingency plans. He'd invited key board members, influential shareholders, and most crucially, several journalists known for their integrity rather than their social connections. Marcus Chun, his most trusted friend on the board, approached with concern etched on his face. You're sure about this? Marcus asked quietly. Once you start this, there's no going back. The old families won't forgive having their secrets exposed. He glanced around the filling room, and Andrew Parker just arrived with his legal team. Indeed, Andrew had positioned himself near the entrance, flanked by expensive suits and 4 smiles. The manila envelope in his hand suggested he'd chosen confrontation over compromise. He caught Lucas's eye and raised his glass in mock salute, his confidence suggesting he believed he still held the upper hand. The atmosphere shifted when Jasmine entered with Zoe. The little girl wore a new dress that matched her mother's, her natural grace drawing surprised murmurs from the crowd. But it was Jasmine who commanded attention, carrying herself with the poise of someone who finally understood her true worth. Several older society members gasped, noting her striking resemblance to Eleanor Bennett in her youth. As the room filled with whispered conversations and speculation, Lucas's friend Thomas, a respected investigative journalist, set up his recording equipment. They had carefully planned this moment, ensuring every revelation would be documented by credible witnesses. Lucas approached the podium just as another crack of thunder shook the building. Thank you all for coming tonight, he began, his voice carrying the weight of generations. We're here to correct a historical wrong and acknowledge a truth that's been buried for too long. The presentation screen behind him illuminated with the first photograph, Eleanor Bennett standing proudly beside James Washington. This is where our story really begins, Lucas continued. With a love that challenged social norms and a family torn apart by prejudice and greed. As Lucas methodically presented the evidence, Andrew's confidence began to crack. The journalist scribbled furiously as decades of carefully hidden transactions came to light. Property deeds, suspicious transfers, and the systematic erasure of the Washington family's claims unfolded before the stunned audience. But tonight isn't just about exposing past wrongs, Lucas declared, his eyes finding Jasmine in the crowd. It's about reclaiming what was lost, not just property and wealth, but dignity and truth. He gestured for Jasmine to join him at the podium, a move that sent ripples through the assembled crowd. Standing together, their unity presented an unmistakable challenge to the old order. Andrews surged forward, waving his envelope. You're all being deceived, he shouted. I have proof that this woman orchestrated everything. Actually, came a new voice from the back of the room. We have proof of something quite different. An elderly woman made her way forward, supported by a cane but radiating authority. Sister Agnes from St. Mary's Orphanage had arrived, carrying a weathered box of documents that would shatter Andrew's final desperate play. The conference room crackled with tension as Sister Agnes made her way to the podium. The elderly nun carried not just documents, but the weight of decades of silent observation. She placed her box on the podium, her weathered hands steady as she began to speak. I've watched over children for 45 years, she began, her voice carrying surprising strength. The night Jasmine was brought to us, I recorded everything, including the identity of the woman who delivered her, Sarah Washington Bennett, Eleanor Bennett's trusted friend and James Washington's niece. She entrusted us with not just a child, but with documents that would one day prove her birthright. Sister Agnes withdrew a series of photographs and letters, each one projected onto the screen for the assembled crowd to see. The evidence was undeniable: correspondence between Eleanor Bennett and the Washington family, Liga. Documents bearing both family signatures, and most damaging to Andrew's claims, proof of systematic property theft orchestrated by the previous generation of corporate leaders. Andrew lunged forward, his composure finally shattering. Those documents are worthless. The statute of limitations doesn't apply to ongoing fraud. Lucas interrupted, producing a final set of papers. These are records of property transfers from the last 5 years, Andrew. Transfers you supervised, knowing full well they involved stolen assets. The Washington Family Trust wasn't dormant. It was being actively suppressed. The room erupted in overlapping conversations as journalists frantically took notes. Marcus Chin stood up, his authority as a board member commanding immediate attention. I move for an immediate audit of all property holdings and a full investigation into these allegations. In the midst of the chaos, Zoe slipped away from her mother's side and approached the podium. With the innocence only a child could possess, she tugged at Sister Agnes's sleeve. "Are you the one who took care of my mommy when she was little like me?" The simple question cut through the tension, drawing all eyes to the little girl. Sister Agnes knelt down, despite her arthritic knees, and smiled. "Yes, dear. And I kept safe all the proof of who she really was, waiting for the right moment." A distinguished elderly man rose from his seat near the back, Judge William Montgomery, known for his unimpeachable integrity. "I've heard enough," he announced. "As trustee of several of the disputed properties, I'm calling for an immediate freeze on all related assets, pending a full investigation." Andrew's legal team began a hasty retreat, but he remained, his face contorted with desperate anger. "You'll regret this, Lucas. The old families won't forgive you for exposing their secrets." "Perhaps it's time for new families to write their own stories," Jasmine responded, her voice clear and confident. She stood at the podium now, the star birthmark visible at the edge of her dress collar, a symbol no longer of shame, but of reclaimed identity. The evening concluded with a series of rapid developments: board members initiating emergency meetings, journalists racing to file their stories, and social titans making hurried phone calls to their lawyers. But in the midst of the professional chaos, a more personal scene unfolded. Lucas and Jasmine found themselves in the hotel's garden, seeking a moment of quiet. The rain had finally stopped, leaving the air fresh and full of possibility. They watched as Zoe played with the twins, who had arrived with Maria to support their new family. "So, what happens now?" Jasmine asked, her hand finding Lucas's. "Now," he replied, "we build something new, something honest." He turned to face her fully. "The company will change, society will adjust, and we'll face it all together, not because of birthmarks or bloodlines, but because we choose to." Their kiss, witnessed by the garden's blooming jasmines, marked not just an ending but a beginning. Above them, the clouds parted to reveal stars, including one that seemed to shine particularly bright, a celestial echo of the mark that had brought them together. The story concludes with transformation on multiple levels: personal growth, social change, and the recognition that family is defined not by status or wealth, but by the choices we make and the love we share. Lucas and Jasmine's journey from that rainy night to this moment of triumph serves as a testament to the power of truth, courage, and the enduring strength of unexpected connections.